The first sound is the flatline, a thin scream cutting through stale air. Daniel Reed said, "Noah," and his voice broke like glass. A nurse held the door as if mercy could be doled out in inches. The ICU smelled of bleach and rain-soaked coats. Dr. Arjun Patel met his eyes and did not blink. He said, "We have done everything we can." The words landed like lead. A clipboard waited, heavy with forms that had teeth. Daniel's hands shook, and he hated that they did. He remembered a birthday candle, and a soccer goal, and a laugh that filled a kitchen. He stared at the ventilator, breathing for a 7-year-old boy. He said, "Tell me there's another option." The answer was a silence that scraped bone. The monitor traced a failing constellation. The storm outside tapped a window like a metronome. Daniel said, "I can't be the one," and the sentence died in his throat. Dr. Patel said, "He is suffering." The word hung like frost. Daniel touched Noah's warm forehead and felt the heat of a life he could not carry across. The pen waited. The room waited. Time waited, cruel and patient. The storm followed them into the family room, a box of tissues between plastic chairs that squeaked when you shifted. Daniel said he wanted pancakes for dinner, and the words felt childish and holy. The counselor's clock ticked like a slow verdict. A poster about grief pretended to be helpful. Daniel thought of the last car ride, Noah arguing that rain makes the city shine. Dr. Patel said, "We need to discuss comfort care," and the phrase sounded like an exit sign. Daniel's ring dug into his finger when he clasped his hands. He said, "He is 7, as if age could barter with fate." The counselor said, "You are allowed to be angry," and he nodded, then shook his head. His phone buzzed with a missed call from work he could not face. Rain clattered, steady and banal. Daniel stared at his shoes and saw a playground in the laces. He said, "I don't know how to be his father in his ending." They led him back through the corridor where the floor remembered every wheel that rolled. Daniel said, "He hates needles," and his voice thinned to a thread. A respiratory therapist explained a timeline that felt like chalk dust. The words comfort and dignity hovered like distant shorelines. He passed a vending machine that reflected his shape as a stranger. Dr. Patel said, "You decide when," and time bent under the weight. Daniel wanted an hour that stretched forever and harmed no one. His phone flashed a photo of Noah as a pirate, felt hat askew. He said, "Tell me what pain looks like now." And the answer was gentle and brutal. The storm eased but left the windows trembling. He felt the building breathe and he wanted to stop it. He said, "I need a minute," and the hallway gave him 10 that tasted like rust. At the bedside, machines formed a city of tiny lights. Daniel said, "Hey, Captain," because Noah liked it when stories began that way. He told a short tale about a ship made of pillows that never sank. He described pancakes shaped like moons. His throat burned. A nurse adjusted a line with the grace of a violinist. She said, "Take your time," and the seconds became fragile glass. Daniel remembered dropping Noah at school and pretending to leave, then hiding to watch him laugh. He said, "I should have skipped that meeting," and shame rose like heat. Dr. Patel stood at the curtain, present but patient. Daniel traced Noah's palm with his thumb, mapping a life. He said, "If love were a body, I would trade mine," and the room bowed under the wish. Consent lay between breath and mercy. Daniel said, "Noah, I am here," and placed the pen beside the form as if it were a flower. Dr. Patel explained each step until the words softened to music. The nurse turned down the lights and the room exhaled. Daniel pictured a Saturday morning where syrup made a map on a plate. He said, "I am not strong, I am only your father," and it felt like truth. Rain softened to a hush that sounded like a lullaby. He signed his name and felt a door open that he wished did not exist. He kissed Noah's forehead and tasted salt. Dr. Patel said, "We will make him comfortable," and Daniel nodded because movement was all he had left. He said, "I'm sorry," to the boy, to the room, to himself, to everything. The hospital discharged him into a world that looked the same, but felt ruined. Daniel said. The sky doesn't care, as clouds broke and light poured across the wet pavement. He held Noah's toy spaceship in his pocket like it was a pulse. Cars splashed by as if nothing had ended. His neighbor Linda waved from across the street, her grocery bags heavy, and he forced a nod. She asked, "How's Noah?" and her voice carried kindness that stabbed. Daniel said, resting, because the truth was unbearable in daylight. He imagined Noah's laughter on the walk home, his sneakers slapping puddles. The air smelled like asphalt and cut grass, sharp and cruel. Daniel touched his chest as if he could hold in the ache. He whispered, "You are still here," but the silence mocked him. Inside the house, the absence screamed louder than any siren. Daniel dropped his keys and the sound echoed. He said, "Home, buddy," though no one answered. The couch still held a blanket, crumpled in Noah's shape. A cereal bowl sat on the counter, spoon fossilized in milk stains. He picked up a toy car and rolled it once, then let it crash. A picture frame leaned crooked, Noah's grin locked in summer sunlight. Daniel said, "I should have taken more photos," and his throat thickened. The hummed, oblivious. He sank into a chair and stared at the calendar marked with a dentist appointment Noah would never keep. Rain tapped the roof as if mocking permanence. He whispered, "Forgive me," to walls that would not. That night, the silence felt like punishment. Daniel sat at the kitchen table with only the clock for company. He said, Noah loved pancakes at night, and the memory burned sweet and bitter. He cracked 2 eggs and missed the third, shells scattering across the counter. He cursed softly, then laughed, the sound hollow. He poured syrup onto an empty plate, watching it spread like time he couldn't stop. A photo on the fridge held Noah in a pirate hat, foam sword raised. Daniel said, "You always won the battles," and tears fell before he could stop them. The pancakes went cold while he sat staring. He whispered, "I don't know how to eat without you," and the house remained cruelly still. At dawn, Daniel wandered into Noah's bedroom, the air thick with childhood. Posters of rockets glowed faintly in blue light. He said, "Commander, are you ready for launch?" Because that was their ritual. A stuffed astronaut slumped on the pillow, helmet tilted. He sat on the edge of the bed, mattress sinking into memory. A crayon drawing taped to the wall showed a family beneath a smiling sun. He touched the paper as though it might warm his fingers. His voice cracked, "I should have stayed home more." The alarm clock blinked 6:02, as if mocking schedules. Dust floated in soft shafts through the curtains. He buried his face in the blanket that still carried Noah's scent. He whispered, "Please, don't fade." Later, Daniel sat in the backyard under gray skies, the swing set creaking in the wind. He said, he used to pump his legs so hard the swing nearly flew away. He closed his eyes and could hear Noah's laughter. Fallen leaves swirled across the grass, brittle underfoot. A soccer ball rested against the fence, muddy and abandoned. Daniel kicked it once, weakly, and it stopped inches away. He said, "I missed too many games," and shame pressed on his chest. A bird startled from a branch and soared free. He whispered, "I wish I had been braver," his voice trembling. The wind carried the words away. The garden looked ordinary, but to Daniel, it had become a graveyard of echoes. The bills stacked higher than his will. Daniel said, "They treat grief like an invoice," staring at envelopes with hospital logos that looked like threats. Each page bore Noah's name in cold ink. He ran his hand across the paper until it blurred. The numbers were impossible, a mountain he could not climb. The phone rang with another reminder, and he silenced it with a hollow thumb. His boss had already left a voicemail about missed shifts. He whispered, "I can't go back yet," though the rent would not wait. The kitchen smelled of damp paper and old coffee. He thought of Noah asking once, "Why do grown-ups always look tired?" He slammed his fist on the counter, regret burning instantly. His voice cracked, "I should have protected you better." The storm outside had passed, but inside him it raged still, ruthless and endless. At the office, the fluorescent lights punished him with their cheerless glare. His boss, Mr. Grant, said, "We've been patient, but work needs commitment." Daniel stood stiff in his suit, shoulders caving. He said, "My son just." But the sentence fractured into silence. Mr. Grant shifted, uneasy, before handing a folder of overdue reports. "Deadlines don't wait," he muttered. Daniel clutched the folder like a burden of stone. Colleagues whispered, eyes darting, sympathy wrapped in distance. The copier jammed in the corner, its flashing light mocking. Daniel thought of Noah's school science fair, the volcano that erupted too soon, and he smiled bitterly. He said, "I should have been there more," his voice barely a breath. The office buzzed on, unkind and oblivious. At night, he visited the church where Noah once sang Christmas carols. The pews smelled of wood and candle wax. Daniel knelt, pressing his palms together so tightly his knuckles blanched. He said, "If you're real, bring him back," his voice echoing. The silence answered with cruelty. A stained glass angel glowed faintly in the moonlight, wings stretched wide. Daniel whispered, "I failed him," and the confession bled into stone walls. He remembered Noah's voice, soft and off-key, singing Silent Night with all the belief in the world. He struck his chest with his fist once, twice, desperate to feel alive. His tears dripped onto the bench, tiny baptisms of grief. He said, "Take me instead," but the church only breathed dust and shadows. The call came from his estranged brother Mark, a voice Daniel hadn't heard in years. "I'm sorry about Noah," Mark said, guilt tangled in static. Daniel closed his eyes, hand gripping the phone as if it might snap. He said, "You weren't there when he was alive," his tone sharp with old wounds. Mark sighed. "Neither were you, Dan." The words detonated in his chest. Memories of childhood fights resurfaced, fists slammed doors, silence that lasted decades. Daniel wanted to scream but only managed, "Don't you dare judge me." The line crackled, then hung heavy in silence. He threw the phone across the room, shattering plastic against the wall. He whispered, "I lost him. I don't need to lose myself too," though he wasn't sure he believed it. At the support group, folding chairs circled like confessions. A woman with tired eyes said, "I lost my daughter in a fire," and the room sighed with empathy. Daniel stared at the floor tiles, jaw locked. When it was his turn, he said, "My son. I chose his ending." And the words cut the air open. Silence followed, raw and sharp. The counselor said gently, "That was love, Daniel, not choice," but he shook his head. He thought of Noah's last breath, the weight of the pen, the ache in his bones. He whispered, "I killed him," and the group leaned forward, but he couldn't meet their eyes. The room felt smaller, hotter, crushing him with the truth he carried like a curse. The letter came in a brown envelope, the kind that never brings comfort. Daniel tore it open at the kitchen counter, his coffee untouched. The words blurred, but one line stabbed. "'Cause of illness, suspected chemical exposure." His heart stalled. He said, "What chemical?" out loud as if the paper would answer. He flipped to the second page and saw the name of the company where he had worked long hours in sealed rooms. The truth came like a blade. His job had poisoned the air that touched his boy. He staggered back, hitting the chair. His voice broke. "I brought it home," and the guilt clawed deeper. The storm outside had passed, but inside him, the thunder began again. He sat in the company parking lot, staring at the building where he had given his strength for years. Concrete walls gleamed sterile under cold sunlight. He whispered, "I traded hours for paychecks and they cost my son." Inside the lobby, he passed awards on the wall, praising safety records, each plaque a mockery. His old co-worker Mark Evans said, "We knew the vents leaked," his eyes heavy with shame. Daniel's jaw clenched. "You knew?" he demanded. Mark nodded, lowering his voice. Management said it was cheaper to ignore. Rage pulsed like fire in his veins. Daniel said, "You let my boy suffer for profit." The silence that followed was heavier than steel. That night, Daniel sat in Noah's empty room, with the report in his lap. The rocket posters stared down like silent witnesses. He said, "I killed you without knowing," his voice a whisper cracked open by grief. His mind replayed every overtime shift, every late night where Noah had asked, "Will you be home for bedtime?" Daniel saw his own absence as poison too. He clutched the stuffed astronaut and pressed it to his chest. "I gave them my time, and they gave me your death," he spat bitterly. The walls seemed to close in, suffocating him with guilt. He punched the mattress and shouted, "I should have quit." His voice broke, collapsing into sobs that shook the room. The next morning, he confronted Dr. Patel with the report. "You knew, didn't you?" Daniel's voice trembled between anger and despair. Dr. Patel sighed, folding his hands. "We suspected, but proving it was beyond our reach," he admitted. Daniel slammed the papers on the desk, the sound sharp as glass. "You let me think it was fate," he growled. Patel's eyes held sorrow but also resignation. "Sometimes families break under truths they cannot carry," he said softly. Daniel shouted, "I carried him into death without knowing I was the reason." The doctor closed his eyes, weary. Silence sat like stone between them. At the cemetery, Daniel stood before Noah's grave, the earth still raw with fresh grass trying to grow. He read the stone. "Beloved son," he said, "they took you from me, but my hands delivered you." His voice cracked in the cold air. Wind rattled the trees like bones. He knelt, pressing his palm flat against the soil. "I swore to protect you, and instead I was the poison," he whispered. His chest heaved with guilt that clung like chains. He closed his eyes, remembering Noah's smile when he'd said, "You're the best dad." The words now cut like knives. Daniel whispered, "I wasn't." The truth buried him deeper than the grave itself. Daniel stood outside the headquarters with the report in his pocket like a loaded truth. The morning tasted of metal and fear. He said, "No more silence," and pushed through the revolving door. The lobby was colder than memory, and brighter than mercy. A receptionist blinked at his name tag from years ago. Mr. Grant intercepted him with a raised palm and a practiced frown. Daniel said, "I need the compliance officer now." His voice held like steel pulled thin. Mark Evans emerged from an elevator, eyes wary and sad. Daniel said, "Tell them what you told me," and the room tightened. Mark swallowed, then nodded, the smallest act of courage trembling. Security hovered near, but Daniel did not flinch. He said, "My son died because leaks were cheaper than fixes." The sentence landed with the weight of a falling girder. They herded him into a conference room that smelled of citrus cleaner and denial. The compliance officer, Ms. Hale, said, "We take allegations seriously." Daniel placed copies of the report on the table, like charges. He said, "You knew vents leaked. You hid it with numbers." She kept her face even, pen tapping a slow code. Mark cleared his throat and said, "Maintenance logged it for 2 years." The words shook the glass walls. A lawyer in Navy sighed and reached for the folder with careful hands. Daniel said, "My boy breathed what I brought home." Silence spread like oil. Miss Hale finally whispered, "There will be an investigation." Daniel leaned in, steady and merciless. He said, "No, there will be accountability." The clock ticked, and no one met his eyes. News traveled faster than remorse. Outside, cameras gathered like crows on a wire. A reporter asked, "Are you seeking revenge?" Daniel felt the word curl like smoke. He said, "I am seeking the truth, and a safer tomorrow." His voice surprised him by not breaking. He spoke of overtime, of leaks, of a boy who loved pirate hats and pancakes. He said, his name was Noah, and he deserved clean air. The crowd softened. Mark stepped to the microphones and said, "I failed to speak sooner." The admission cracked something open. Daniel felt grief and fury braid into resolve. He said, "Protect the workers, test the homes, admit the cost." Sirens wailed somewhere far away, and this time they did not scare him. That night the house waited like a question he finally had to answer. Daniel sat at Noah's desk with a blank page that felt like a field. He said, "I choose love over rot," and began writing a victim impact letter. The words came slow, then faster, honest as bruises. He described bedtime stories, hospital monitors, and a pen that signed mercy. He wrote to the board, to regulators, to every father who feared a paycheck more than poison. He said, "Courage begins where denial ends." He paused and looked at the stuffed astronaut, sentinel of softer days. He whispered, "Guide me, Captain," and the room seemed to breathe easier. He kept writing until his hand ached and the page shone with salt. In the hospital chapel, he asked Dr. Patel to meet him where it had all started to break. The small room smelled of wax and linen. Daniel said, "I wanted to hate you for not telling me," and his voice was tired but clear. Dr. Patel bowed his head. He said, "I feared the truth would crush what was left of you." Daniel held the letter and felt its weight. He said, "I cannot carry rage and Noah at the same time." The confession tasted like rain after ash. Patel's eyes shone with grief that had nowhere to go. Daniel reached out and they stood in awkward grace. He said, "I forgive you, and I am learning to forgive me." The words did not fix him, but they opened a door he could walk through. The audit report landed like a slow sunrise, bringing facts instead of thunder. Ms. Hale called to say the vents were sealed and protocols rewritten. Daniel said, "Make the homes safe too," and she promised door-to-door testing. Mark Evans met him outside the plant and stared at his shoes. He said, "I joined the worker committee," and guilt softened into purpose. Daniel nodded, feeling the ache where rage once lived. He met a small circle of employees and shared Noah's story without flinching. He said, "Protect each other first," and their faces steadied. A notice board filled with new hotlines and inspection dates. For the first time, the building looked less like a wound. Daniel walked away not lighter, but upright. Sunday crept in with the smell of batter and a careful peace. Daniel set 2 plates, then 1, then smiled at the habit. He said, "Pancakes for the captain," and flipped a moon shape with a steady wrist. The kitchen radio played a low hymn of static and old soul. He opened a thin wooden box and arranged treasures like constellations. A pirate hat feather. A soccer medal scuffed by joy. A note that read, "Don't forget story time." He said, "I won't," and placed the box high, not hidden. Steam lifted from the skillet and fogged the window. The house did not feel cruel. It felt like a chapel built from mornings. He ate slowly and left a bite for memory. At Noah's school, the principal unveiled a small bench under a maple. Children's voices rang like sparrows in new leaves. The plaque read, "For Noah Reed, who loved rockets and laughter." Daniel said, "Thank you," and his voice held. He told a science class about air and how we share it. He said, "Safety is love you can measure," and the room went quiet. A boy raised his hand and asked if sadness ends. Daniel answered carefully. He said, "Sadness changes shape, and it teaches us to care harder." The teacher nodded with wet eyes. Daniel traced the bench edge and felt grain like a timeline. The wind moved through the maple and sounded like applause. He drove to the coast where the horizon could carry weight. The ocean breathed in long, patient sentences. "I." Daniel stood with shoes in one hand and a paper kite in the other. He said, "Ready, Captain," and let the string unspool. The kite rose, a small geometry against a vast forgiveness. He breathed with the waves and did not count the seconds. A gull stitched the sky with its quiet wing beats. He said, "I will live kindly," and the vow felt true. He thought of Dr. Patel and chose gratitude instead of blame. He thought of Mark and chose courage over contempt. The kite steadied and tugged, asking for trust. He gave it. Evening returned him to the cemetery where grass had grown softer. He carried the letter he wrote in Noah's room, edges worn by rereads. He said, "I sent this to the board, and I kept a copy for you and laid it beneath the stone." The air held that blue hour hush that forgives noise. He kneeled and let silence do the talking. A memory flickered of Noah pretending to sleep, and then giggling. Daniel smiled without breaking. He said, "I forgive the man I was," and the sentence did not shatter. Streetlights blinked awake beyond the trees. The ache remained, smaller than the love beside it. He stood, and felt the night accept him. Daniel walked through the park at dusk, where the swings squeaked like echoes of a younger world. Children's laughter drifted, sharp with memory but gentle in presence. He said, "I hear you in them," and his steps slowed. He passed a father pushing his daughter higher, the girl shouting with fearless joy. His chest tightened but did not collapse. The air smelled of cut grass and wood chips, familiar and strange. He sat on a bench, the same model as Noah's memorial, and placed his palms flat on the wood. He whispered, "I'm still your dad," and the words stayed steady. The light shifted golden to violet, and the park's lamps hummed awake. For the first time, Daniel did not feel like an intruder in the world of the living. At home, the dining table held only one plate, but it no longer felt like punishment. Daniel set down a simple meal, folded hands and whispered, "Thank you, Captain, for teaching me how to love louder." The air was quiet but not cruel. He unfolded Noah's crayon drawing from the wall and laid it flat near his fork. He said, "Family under the sun. That's still us," and the paper trembled slightly in the breeze from the window. He chewed slowly, each bite grounding him in presence. The hum of the fridge and the ticking clock felt less like reminders and more like heartbeat. He looked at the chair opposite, smiled faintly, and said, "Eat with me tonight," as though the room might listen. Later he found himself on Noah's bed, the stuffed astronaut waiting where he had left it. He said, "I'm learning piece by piece," and held the toy close. The sheets still smelled faintly of dust and childhood. He stretched out and closed his eyes, remembering stories told in whispers under glow-in-the-dark stars. His voice cracked as he murmured, "Guide me when I forget." The silence did not sting, it steadied. He imagined Noah's hand tugging his sleeve, pulling him toward laughter. Daniel breathed deeply and let the quiet cover him like a blanket. He whispered, "I will keep you alive in how I live," and the sentence rested gentle instead of heavy. The next morning he stood at his front door, dressed for work not as burden but as choice. Sunlight painted long stripes across the hallway. He said, "Today I walk forward with him beside me," and adjusted his tie. In the mirror, he saw lines carved by grief, but steadied by resolve. He touched Noah's photo on the shelf, the boy's gap-toothed smile grinning at eternity. He whispered, "We go together," and pocketed the spaceship toy like armor. Birds outside sang ordinary songs, and for once he joined them with a hum. The air tasted new, not because loss had left, but because love had stayed. He closed the door gently and stepped into the day without fear. At night he returned to the cemetery for the last time in the story. The air was still, the sky littered with stars unbroken by cloud. Daniel sat cross-legged at the grave, a candle flickering between them. He said, "I would do it all again, for you," his voice steady with love instead of collapse. The words rose into the night like smoke. He touched the stone and felt it warm under candlelight. He whispered, "You are my forever captain," and smiled through wet eyes. The world around him hushed, reverent. A breeze carried the flame sideways but did not kill it. Daniel closed his eyes, breathed, and for the first time since the hospital, felt peace enough to let silence finish the prayer.